Ireland's relationship with the EU began in 1973, when it was then called the European Economic Community. The Irish government of the day wanted to join so that Irish farmers and businesses could sell their goods and services to other European countries without having to pay high taxes, and so Ireland could benefit from development funds that the other member states sent to Ireland to help us build roads, railways and give assistance to rural communities. Since we joined in 1973, Ireland has received €60 billion of EU funds. But we've come a long way since the 1970s. Ireland has seen great social and economic change, becoming one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. The financial crisis of 2008 has hit us pretty hard. The challenges as we face today and those that will face us in years to come will be no less demanding, and we will need urgent action. How are we to tackle rising unemployment, high cost of living, climate change, emigration and crime? Ireland cannot do everything by itself. Even the biggest EU states are small in a globalised world, so when we work together, we can speak with a stronger voice. Since 2000, all EU leaders have been in agreement that the European Union needs urgent reform. The Lisbon Treaty is a compromise among all the countries in the EU and is designed to reform the way the EU works. If each country approves the Lisbon Treaty, it will make changes to the way Ireland cooperates with other European countries in working against crime, cooperating on the international stage and making the institutions of the European Union more democratic and transparent. In June 2008, the Irish people were asked to vote on the Lisbon Treaty. Most voters said no. 46% said that this was because they did not understand what the treaty was about. Others were worried about whether the treaty might affect Irish family values, or Irish neutrality, or whether there might be conscription into a European army. Others thought that maybe the treaty would force new taxes, and some were concerned about the possible loss of an Irish commissioner. Having listened to Irish people's concerns, the Taoiseach Brian Cowan went to Brussels in December 2008 to meet all the other Prime Ministers and Presidents of the EU member states. He made sure that Ireland will keep its commissioner in Brussels. He also made sure that Ireland will get legal guarantees to protect its sovereignty over neutrality, taxes and family law, making sure that EU law will not change any of these areas and leaving power in these areas in Irish hands. The same problems that made a new treaty necessary in the first place, like rising unemployment, recession, climate change and crime, have not gone away, and Ireland still needs new EU rules to make sure that when it cooperates with other EU countries, it is treated fairly and that you, the citizen, can make sure that your elected representatives in the Irish government and in the European Parliament are doing their jobs. This is why the Irish government has decided that it is in Ireland's interest to approve the Lisbon Treaty, because all the governments of the EU's member states consider the Lisbon Treaty to contain the tools they need to cooperate on the world stage to address the big problems of the 21st century. With a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty and the Irish guarantees set for 2009, this presentation aims to explain the Lisbon Treaty. Why Europe? What is the EU and how does it work? What do you think when you hear the word Brussels? Many people think that Brussels is the capital city of the EU and that all decisions relating to the EU are taken there by a central EU government. In fact, the EU has no capital, since the EU is not a country. So what do we mean by Brussels? Think about it in terms of sport, where Brussels is the name of the team. A sports team is not separate from its players. Without players, there is no team. Only when the players cooperate as a unit is there a team. So who are the Irish players? First and foremost, the Taoiseach Brian Cowan is part of the European Council. This is the name given to a meeting of the Prime Ministers and Presidents of EU countries. During these meetings, Brian Cowan will debate with the other EU leaders about what the EU should be doing. The European Commission then receives a report from the European Council, instructing it to come up with ideas to put decisions of the EU leaders into effect. The European Commission is the civil service of the European Union. Charlie McCreevy is the Irish Commissioner and is responsible for supervising companies and businesses in the European Union. To take a few other high-profile examples of Irish people in the European Commission, Catherine Day is Secretary General of the Commission, and David O'Sullivan is the head of the International Trade Department. Once the European Commission comes up with ideas, these ideas are debated and discussed in two institutions. The first is the Council of Ministers, which is composed of government ministers. The Irish minister who represents the votes for Ireland in the Council of Ministers changes depending on the topic being discussed. For example, if the economy is being debated, the Minister for Finance, Brian Lenihan, will represent Ireland. If climate change is the issue, John Gormley will represent Ireland. The Council of Ministers represents national governments. The way decisions are made in the Council of Ministers is set to change if the Lisbon Treaty is passed. The second institution that debates and adopts EU regulations is the European Parliament. The European Parliament is directly elected by citizens and its members are called MEPs. These are the Irish MEPs that represent you in the European Parliament. You are directly represented by your MEPs in the European Parliament. They work for you. National parliaments play an important role in the day-to-day functioning of the European Union by scrutinising ministers that vote in the Council of Ministers and by making sure that the EU does not produce laws that would be better made at national level. The Oireachtas plays a key role in this respect, but following the Irish no vote it decided that it could do much better and has decided to reform the way it keeps an eye on Irish interests in Brussels. The European Court of Justice hears cases that are brought to it by national courts, such as the Irish Supreme Court and the European Commission. Its job is to make sure that the EU law is applied fairly and without discrimination. The two Irish judges in the ECJ are Aindrias O'Keefe and Kevin O'Higgins. You can see that Brussels is about Irish voices, Irish influence and Irish representatives, making your concerns and your wishes heard in the European Union. What does the Lisbon Treaty do? Values. The Lisbon Treaty makes the European Union an organisation of values. The treaty makes sure that the EU must, in all of its work, respect human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, respect for human rights, respect for international law, sustainable development, free and fair trade, peace, the eradication of poverty, protection of the rights of the child, social justice, and protection of the environment. EU reform. The Lisbon Treaty is designed to update the European Union and to bring it into the 21st century. In 2004, 10 new countries joined the EU, meaning that there are now 450 million people in the European Union. Like a game of sport, the decision to enlarge a team from 15 players to 27 players needs a review of the rules of the game. The European Council, as we saw, is the meeting between EU leaders, including the Taoiseach. The Lisbon Treaty will make sure that the EU leaders meet at least 4 times a year and that its meetings be transparent. One of the main innovations in the Lisbon Treaty is the creation of a President of the European Council. This person will be elected by the national governments and will be responsible for making sure that EU leaders agree on important issues. Bertie Ahern has been suggested as a possible candidate.